While Anthony Albanese is drawing up a new plan for tax cuts and cost of living relief today, another former Prime Minister is making moves of his own. Scott Morrison will formally announce his resignation from politics.
Nearly 2 years after his government's crushing election defeat, Mr Morrison said he plans to take on new challenges in the global corporate sector and spend more time with family.
Morrison was Prime Minister for 4 years, from 2018, and served as Treasurer under Malcolm Turnbull prior to that. It was in that job that he introduced the tax scheme that Anthony Albanese's government is wrestling with at an extraordinary caucus meeting in Canberra today.
In this budget, we are providing tax relief to encourage and reward working Australians and to reduce the cost pressures on households.
Well, the caucus meeting is a really important one for Anthony Albanese in particular, but also for Jim Chalmers and the entire government.
Greg Brown is Chief of the Australian's Canberra Bureau.
Expectations are there will be a change to the Stage 3 tax cut package, and they're keeping things very tight-lipped. But what sources within the government are indicating to us are that the package could give higher tax cuts to lower and middle income earners and lower tax cuts to high income earners. So this looks like the government is repositioning itself to win over low and middle income voters. However, there are real risks in this because it will undoubtedly be a broken promise if some of those high income earners are indeed worse off.
Scott Morrison has been the member for the federal seat of Cook for the duration of his 17-year political career. The long-held Liberal seat straddles the Georges River in Sydney's south, around the Sutherland Shire. Morrison's departure will trigger a by-election in Cook ahead of the 2024 federal budget, and that throws up a new kind of political challenge for the government.
I think by-elections are typically viewed in the negative for the government, particularly one like this where it's a very safe Liberal seat. Scott Morrison will nearly certainly be replaced by another Liberal, and if not, it would have to be a pretty remarkable independent. So everyone will be looking at whether the government goes backwards or not in the seat. And in by-elections, they normally do, particularly at a time when the government is going through a difficult period. So for all intents and purposes, it's probably a little bit inconsequential, but I'm sure the Liberals will be screaming with joy if there's a swing towards them, because at the moment, any form of momentum is good for Peter Dutton.
Voters in Cook will go to the polls not long after another by-election happens in the Victorian seat of Dunley.
And news just in, a date has been set for the by-election in the electorate of Dunley in Victoria, triggered by former Labor MP Peter Murphy's death last year from breast cancer. Residents will head to the polls.
That's a crucial test for the government, which is struggling in the polls amid a worsening cost of living crisis and a major loss in last year's Voice referendum.
I think they're going to really throw the kitchen sink at Dunley compared to what they would with Cook, because even though the Liberal brand is really on the nose in Victoria, Dunley is a swing seat. So Anthony Albanese will view it as very important that Labor holds on to that seat. And I think Cook really depends on the way Dunley goes as to how much Labor throws into it. If Albanese loses Dunley, he will want to limit the losses in Cook. Whereas if he wins Dunley, I think you'd see Labor have a more low-key campaign in Cook because the pressure will be off.
The mood in Dunley has motivated Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to embark on an election-style blitz in a bid to win back voters. In just 1 month, he's done dozens of interviews, made public appearances, and delivered press conference after press conference.
Well, more than 50 press conferences tallied up today, interviews and media stunts since mid-December by the Prime Minister. Is any of it changing your mind?
I think the government would be on balance happy that he's distracting from their debate on the Stage 3 tax cut. But I think in the end, if they make changes to Stage 3, that will be the thing that dominates the media cycle, not Scott Morrison's departure. Many people say it has been a long time coming for Scott Morrison. I think one crucial thing is he has lined up some roles as far as advisory on geopolitics and matters like that. So I think that's key these days for even former prime ministers. Now that the post-political pension is not as generous and Morrison has a young family and he needs to keep paying school fees, paying the mortgage, so they do need to set up a career post-politics, and it's not always an easy thing when you finish being prime minister, because when you're elected, nearly half the population doesn't like you, and by the time you've finished, just about nobody likes you.
Coming up after the break, a look back at Scott Morrison's complex legacy. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison had a knack for drumming up headlines over the course of his 17-year career in politics. Back in 2017, he famously carried a lump of coal into Parliament to taunt Labor about its environmental policies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
It's coal. It was dug up by men and women who...
Then, in early 2020, before the COVID-19 pandemic took hold, he was snapped enjoying a beachside holiday in Hawaii while bushfires raged across Australia.
Because our town doesn't have a lot of money, but we have hearts of gold, Mr. Prime Minister.
People are feeling very raw at the moment, and that's why I came today, to be here, to see it for myself, to offer what comfort I could, but you can't always in every circumstance.
And after the coalition lost to Labor at the federal election in 2022, it was revealed by the Australians Simon Benson and Jeff Chambers that Morrison had secretly appointed himself to a suite of ministerial portfolios, using privileges afforded to him by the pandemic. Most notably, he was the architect of Australia's trilateral defence pact with the US and the UK, also known as AUKUS.
Today I announce a new partnership, a new agreement that I describe as a forever partnership. A forever partnership for a new time between the oldest and most trusted of friends.
He was also a founding member of the Quad Leaders Dialogue with India, Japan and the US, and he took a hard line against China as Prime Minister. Morrison's international reputation was bolstered by his management of the pandemic, both from public health and economic perspectives.
Today I announce that we are committing $130 billion over the next 6 months to support the jobs and livelihoods of what we anticipate of being almost 6 million Australians who will need that lifeline in the months ahead.
I think this will be a matter of pretty fierce debate, actually. My personal view is he was fundamentally a pragmatist. He comes from a political background, which is he was the state director of the New South Wales Liberal Party. He ruthlessly won his pre-selection in Cook. So his first aim was to get into Parliament. And then he wanted to become a senior minister, which he did. And then he wanted to become Prime Minister. And then he wanted to win elections. And I think any policy contributions he could give along the way were good, and he welcomed those. But I think fundamentally he was interested in proving his position in Parliament and maintaining his position as Prime Minister. He's quite derided in some circles about being driven by religion or being driven by conservatism. And I've no doubt that those are issues that he holds dear to his heart. But I, for example, don't think his religion played a major role in his prime ministership. I think he looked more closely at the polls and at the focus groups.
It's perhaps a symbol of Scott Morrison's complex legacy that his successor will spend today and the foreseeable future forging a path forward on a policy he devised almost 6 years ago when the world was a very different place.
Well, I think the irony is that you could never underestimate Morrison's political abilities. And in Labor agreeing to stage 3, it was a real hardening of their politics. And I think Labor came to the conclusion that if they gave him an inch, he'd take a mile. So they reluctantly agreed to stage 3. It was an ironclad promise. So I think the irony of Labor now being torn into shreds on stage 3 at the same time Scott Morrison is leaving is that it was sort of the deal with the devil that they had to do to get elected.
Greg Brown is Chief of the Australian's Canberra Bureau. You can read all our reporting and analysis from today's extraordinary caucus meeting at theaustralian.com.au.